Hello, and welcome to this very special Thulean edition of Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast. I've been journeying in Iceland, and I'm here having a casual interview with the man behind some projects we've covered before, Perkwunos, Níðstöng, and one we haven't really covered that I think is pronounced something like Äkth Gánahëth.
I can't even tell you how to pronounce it actually. Like, this is just like a made-up name, so I have no pronunciation for it, but it sounds legit.
Yeah, in the Legion Noir tradition,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, and so tell the Terminators who you are.
So my name is Adrian. I'm living here in Iceland. I am German originally. Moved here 6 years ago, and yeah, like said before, I've been working on some projects over the last 6 years, including Níðstöng, Perkwunos, Äkth Gánahëth, and a few ambient projects that are still in the works, more or less in the background because I haven't done anything with it for like ages, I think. But it's still active, like all of it is still active, although most projects have been kind of like on hiatus right now. But yeah, we are making our way back to music now and gonna work on some new stuff soon.
Yeah, you were telling me there's a Perkwunos LP in the works.
Yeah.
Very cool. And maybe for the listeners, could you give them a brief chronology of these projects? We reviewed Níðstöng before Perkwunos, but which did you start with?
I actually started with the ambient projects. It was the first thing I did when COVID hit, and they were kind of like strict restrictions over here. Like, you couldn't leave the house properly, like not going anywhere but to the stores. And I landed in quarantine eventually. So I was like hanging out at home, bored and everything, started to play around with some synthesizers and everything. That's how it started out. Then from there I took the step to Äkth, which is technically the most like synth heavy of all the projects. So I tried to combine the foundation that I created with the ambient projects with some black metal riffs, and yeah, that came out, was really well perceived. I released a demo through Church of Eradication, which is like a little German label. From there on, we went over to Death Cult Records, released the LP. Then, while this LP was in the works, I started Níðstöng, which was more or less just like my tribute to Ildiarn, which was like has been one of the most important projects for myself. Then we went to Perkwunos not for 3 years ago, I think. That's when we started with that one. It was more or less of like a holiday idea, listening to White Forest and just give it a go. But that kind of became my main project for myself, I think. Like, this is the project I put the most work into and I'm still putting the most work into. So yeah, that's kind of how it all happened.
Yeah, so that's interesting because Adrian stands out because he has so far dedicated himself to kind of what in the punk scene you'd call worship projects, right? This sort of and taking kind of what the death metal guy always calls a craftsman's metal approach, right? Focusing on this very in-depth engagement with specific styles. And honestly, in this interview, I was going to give you a bit of a hard time and ask, okay, when are you going to make your own original vision?
Yeah.
But it seems like Perkwunos is becoming that. You sent me some of those tracks you're working on, and I can hear a more sort of personal vision forming. Yeah. So why don't we talk a bit about Perkwunos in general then? What was it so you said that just started from listening to a lot of Hate Forest. I imagine it must also have, I guess with Níðstöng too, but I imagine both projects have a lot to do with the Icelandic landscape.
Yeah, I think that's just more true for Níðstöng in that sense, because this is directly influenced by Icelandic nature. Like, many of the ideas, or the idea to start this project in the first place came from lots of hikes that I was taking around the area where I live in Mosfellsbær. You have quite a few hills around and like beautiful green moss covered landscapes, and that just like kind of reminded me of the ambient records by Ildian, the landscapes, with the cover artworks on the Hardangervidda record, which is very like this mountainy Norwegian area, and just gave me that vibe, and it was kind of inspiring to do that. While Perkwunos is not that strictly connected to Iceland in that sense, because this is more like reflecting a personal interest of mine into Indo-European history and Germanic history. So of course it has its ties to Iceland, by Iceland being a deeply Germanic country in terms of history and language and everything. But this is more connected to a personal vision rather than to the countryside over here. But Níðstöng is definitely reflecting Icelandic nature.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And Perkwunos is kind of the imaginary space is more the steps and the kurgans and
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's see. So your early stuff stood out because you really got inside Sanko's melodic sensibility and his chording. How did you go about kind of internalizing the style like that? Because it's not like there are I know there are Hate Forest tabs, but you kind of have to figure it out for yourself, right?
Yeah, I actually haven't really started creating the music by playing Hate Forest stuff. I basically just was jamming around, and I created riffs that I was like, hey, this kind of sounds like Hate Forest. And that's actually what started the whole thing, I accidentally discovered riffs that sounded like Hate Forest, and then I was like, okay, this is a style that feels very natural. And despite being clearly led by Hate Forest and by Sanko's work in general, it still felt like something that I was able to do without trying or pretending to do something that I would not do myself, So this had some... It kind of happened on its own, while having a clear example of what I like or what I want to sound like or what I think accompanies the themes, in the best and most direct way.
Yeah. So what so there are a couple angles on this. What would you? Okay, let's get nerdy about technique. What would you say sort of defined those Sanko-ish riffs you were starting to play? I assume drone string. What were you tuned to?
Guitar tuning.
No, I know. Yeah. What were you tuned to with guitar? The word on the street, right, is that Hate Forest is mostly in D flat.
Yeah.
Did you tune to D flat? Did you tune lower?
I actually just played on E standard, so standard guitar tuning in that sense. But I think that Hate Forest is not necessarily about the tuning. I think what makes Hate Forest is this really fast-paced, traditional riffing approach. I mean, in that sense, Hate Forest of all the Ukrainian projects is, in my opinion, the most Norwegian one in terms of riffing and in terms of atmosphere. So I think Hate Forest is just basically taking an extreme approach influenced by Immortal and Dark Throne and Burzum, obviously, and mixing it with this super heavy and driving, bolt throwish death metal influence. And I think this really is what defines the music. The drumming, for example, is obviously a drum machine and very sterile in that sense. But I think this is what makes the music so heavy and so driving, is this super sterile, monotonous drum beats in the sense that are just like a bulldozer running over the landscape. And this is what I thought made the sound. And that's what I tried, for example, on the first demo, the Stellai one. They have this very monotonous but fast drumming combined with triplets in 16ths riffing and everything, typical Norwegian riffing in that sense, but very fast and driving.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of characterizing it. I definitely see what you mean about most Norwegian. I would also associate it with Terminus.
Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of down-tuned but highly textured and folky sound? But Terminus is like Norwegian, but it almost sounds Swedish or Slavic or something. Yeah, kind of on the edge there. The sort of Yeah, you do a nice job with the programming. I was thinking that when I was listening to your new tracks, there's very crisply defined beats, and you could do Hate Forest Worship with a very static blast beat kind of thing, and just a kind of rolling 16th. But you've got like very heavy downbeats and kind of gallops in there. Yeah. How did you had you programmed drums? I guess you'd done some programming for Níðstöng, but do you have what was your method for, say, did you start with the guitars, then program the beats, or how did you go about how do you make good programmed drums? Because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with.
I usually start with the guitars. Like, this is my bass line, basically. And I try to program drums in a way that they emphasize and support the guitars. You know, like, I think this is also what basically defines Hate Forest pretty much, because the guitars are, of course, really heavy and like very like thick. You know, there's like a wall of sound basically. And I think this continues like basically either playing double bass or blast beats on like high tempo just like supports the sound wall. And I think this is what I've done for Perkwunos mostly. I just wrote the guitars, added the bass line, and then I was like, okay, how do we program drums that like support the sound and convey this heaviness and this like this thick sound that we want. For Níðstöng, for example, it has sometimes been that way, sometimes the other way. You know, like Ildian has this very typical this ufta beats, like this dum dum dum, and like, you know, I was trying to emulate the sound, of course, and then many times I would just like program a simple drum beat and then write riffs over that. So because Níðstöng is more or less improvised, like Níðstöng has no songwriting in that sense. The only thing that's like written is the lyrics, like, and the vocals in that sense. So the guitars and bass lines and drums, this is just like me sitting on the computer doing something, and this is what comes out. That's why I love this project so much, because it has such a clear like emotional attachment to me, because like it is what I feel in these moments, what I think in these moments. I mean, this is basically an anger outlet, and has been working as this. That's why Níðstöng is not as elaborate as, for example, Perkwunos is. Right.
Yeah, so when you're feeling pissed, you just go bash out some Níðstöng songs. Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. With Perkwunos, you're really before we go to the future of Perkwunos, another question would be like, what to you I guess you've talked about what defines the Hate Forest sound. Are there any other bands that you think have done a good job of capturing or drawing on that essence? Because I can think of a few other Hate Forest worship bands, and then a number of bands where there's a clear influence. What other sort of more nowadays bands do you like who are drawing on that?
Obviously Death Fortress, which I think are probably the best band in this like micro genre. Very talented musicians, very creative songwriting, although sticking clearly to this Ukrainian Hate Forest like sound. Then you have Final Eclipse, which I think is basically just like Death Fortress. That's like the new project that came. Okay. It's not as death metal heavy, you know, but like the music sounds very much like Hate Forest, but the vocals are more like normal black metal vocals. But I think it's the same guy that's behind that one, because the songwriting is very similar. Then we have, not sure how you pronounce them, they're written Yasha. I think they are Russian. Or
yeah.
And they have, they have a Hate Forest undertone, which I really like. That's actually all I can think of, because I think this has been increasing recently. I think like the general interest in what Hate Forest are playing has increased recently, but I don't think this has spawned as many bands as like, for example, the whole French stuff. You know, this is something that's still very much of like a little subgenre, a microgenre within the subgenre of black metal.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a. I mean, it's been very easy for people to turn French black metal into kind of a pop sound that catches on in a certain way, and you really just can't do that with Hate Forest. It's inherently inaccessible music, and it kind of rejects that. And I guess Druid would be the one that gets more attention as far as a band that's been super influential. I also really like that first EP by Rubajal from the United States. Yeah. And it's like an American take on that style.
There's this guy, like I think he was drumming in the project, Tyler.
Cool dude.
He's a cool dude. Yeah, I've talked to him through the internet. Mm-hmm. He showed me this stuff. Very cool, actually. Like, obviously also influenced by other Slavic bands, but like having a very like hate force undertone to it. Like, cool stuff.
Very aggressive, and they sort of take hate force and slow it down.
Yeah,
you speed it up. Almost.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it feels like almost a bit more folky at times. Like their stuff has like a more of this like Gravelandish, folkish tone to it as well. Very nice combination. Like good stuff. Very underrated as well.
Yeah, they're
deserves more attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're great. But yeah, you could hear Hate Forest and you could say, okay, we're going to slow it down and make this kind of doomish Graveland stuff. Or you can hear it and think, this is like Norwegian black metal and it's speed. And your new stuff with Perkwunos, I was especially that, like the sample track 5 you said, I love that one. It's fucking fast.
Yeah, it's very fast.
Yeah, it's very, very fast picking.
It's the first time that my fucking hands hurt after recording something.
Yeah, I can see that. So it seems like on this new material, you're really letting other influences spill into the songwriting and making it more this sound that called to you initially from outside yourself. Now you're making it your own.
Yeah.
And so how are you doing that?
Like, actually, the funny thing is, I'm never like consciously trying to make it sound more like individual or something, or more like myself. I always believed this to be like more or less of a Hate Forest worship project, but this is just like stuff that came to me naturally, like just by listening to other music. I cannot avoid like having influences from music that I recently listened to and combining it with the stuff that I've already done. So like in these songs you will have like much more like death metal influence, for example, especially in the longer one that I sent you. It has a very like bold throwish undertone in many parts of it, and like in general like more focusing on low tones and like heavy atmosphere. And then we also have like influences from bands like Äkth and Gánahëth from Russia. And yeah, this has just like happened very dynamically. I haven't tried to force something new into it, but I think this is just like how this project will eventually develop, because like I said, this is the project where I put the most work in. This is the project that gets the most like conscious songwriting from me. And I think this is just a consequence of that, because I want to make this something that actually has a lot of like obviously takes a lot of work, and has a very elaborate structure and a very like big emphasis on conveying this idea of what the whole thematic complex behind it is.
Okay, that I like that. That makes sense, and it kind of makes sense with it's like rather than starting top down with a concept or a vision, you're following the craftsmanship. You're like, I want this to be something I put a lot of effort into and that has a certain amount of detail and depth. And in order to fill out that, it naturally leads you to new sonic territory. Okay. That's a cool way of explaining it.
Actually, quite a little fun fact about the LP is this LP has been written 3 times. So I have basically been deleting 3 LPs since. I am very like perfectionistic when it comes to music, and if I'm not convinced of something, meaning that it doesn't have to be bad in that sense, but if I don't feel like this is it anymore after like 4 or 5 listens, then it's just like out. So that's why it took so long, and I have had an LP written 2 or 3 times now, and there are riffs from these songs in these songs I sent you. So like there are, I didn't like cross it all out, but I have just like taken single ideas out of these songs and took them over to new tracks, and now I'm finally happy with it. So once I'm done recording the vocals, then this is finally gonna hit the internet.
Yeah, and hopefully more than the internet. I mean, you probably don't have a label yet, but
well, technically, I'm working on the demo tape right now, like the one that I released 2.5 years ago. The plan was to release it through GoToWarex. So there is a cover. Danny bought a cover from the guy that did like multiple artworks for Diocletian and everything. Actually, cool stuff. I think it's called Warhead. Yeah, Warhead. Yeah. He bought an artwork from this one, and really cool actually. But I have no idea how where we are in this process. So I would like to release it through Danny stuff because like I have always had like good experiences with Danny, and I like the like visual work that he puts into his records a lot, and it has always been like very like pleasing quality to it that I admire in having. You know, like if I put like effort to something, I want the product to be like complete in the end, and he did that with Níðstöng. I really love the artwork he had. The guy Niels Brusli from Norway that did the artworks for Ildjarn. He did the artwork for the Níðstöng LP that came out, and that was really fucking cool. He like phoned through some art school and got the phone number of this guy from I think it was some Norwegian art university. He really puts his work into this stuff. You know, like he knows his ways and he puts lots of effort into his releases.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, he went the extra mile to track that guy down. Yeah. So I think you've also said you are considering pulling together a live lineup for Perkwunos. Are there people you're in talks with already?
There are people I'm in talks with. Yeah, it's staying anonymous for now, but like there's plans, and the plans are hopefully going to be realized next year. Like that would be ideal to play the stuff next year because this is when we're going to have the new stuff out. Going to have a bit more new material that I haven't recorded yet, but it's written. So yeah, if everything goes as I planned, then we should be on stage next year.
All right, very cool. That's So I mean, you're really going the completing the circuit from one-man project to fully realized band. You know, we always hassle people on Terminus like, you need to make this a real band. So Adrian's doing it, and you can too. Okay, so also, you know, we were talking a bit the other night, and you know, you've had a kind of interesting sort of life story and musical development. An interesting journey to where you are in metal. So tell the people how you got into metal in the first place and this winding path you took.
So it was kind of interesting. My dad is basically where it all starts because my dad is a big fan of like traditional rock music and traditional heavy metal. Has always been into like all the old British stuff like Saxon, Iron Maiden, Motorhead, and all the likes. So I had contact to heavy metal at a really early age in that sense. Like probably when I was 8 years old, I was sort of first started listening to like more classic rock stuff like Deep Purple and everything. That's what I got from my dad in the first place. And then we went over to Iron Maiden, and I had the chance to see many of those bands live eventually. So Motorhead and Slayer and all that stuff when I was younger.
Awesome.
That was very like influential on me, especially during my teenage years. From there, I've gotten into basically thrash metal and the whole melodic death thing when I was like around 13, 12 years old. That's when I first was introduced to At the Gates, which was really more or less life-changing for me because this was the first extreme metal band that I listened to. And from there we went into the more like cheesy parts of black metal, meaning old Dimmu Borgir and everything, you know, Stormblast especially. Then all the other like folky black metal stuff from Germany at the time, like Taunusheim, very cringy shit, but actually kind of cool still. And from there, at some point, we made the transition to punk music and to hardcore, which was a really interesting development because I feel most people first get into hardcore punk and then get into metal.
Yeah, especially from the American scene.
Yeah, but for me, it was exactly the other way around. So I first got into metal, and from there on, I got into the more heavy metal influenced hardcore punk bands like Integrity and all the very dark and like heavy stuff, all this power violence stuff from the time, like Infest and Despise You and everything. From there, we went into straight edge hardcore, mostly this 90s straight edge hardcore thing. Earth Crisis, Archangel, Length of Time, lots of Congress, Morning Again, all that stuff. Like I was really big on the vegan straight edge metal mosh stuff back then, and had a band in that direction called Fourth Crusade.
Named after the bolt thrower record?
Yeah,
sick.
Was like basically pretty much classical Belgian sound like Archangel or like the Italian band like Reprisal and everything. So very metal, lots of vegetables, and it was a very clearly, annoyingly vegan band. But yeah, that was an important time in my life, and I really enjoyed the time. And it was a cool time for hardcore, I think.
So those are some great bands. I mean, we've talked on the show a lot, obviously, about Integrity, but also the 8,000 Belgian bands and, Archangel and Congress and all that. And the German militant straight edge stuff is cool. And, even if sometimes it's militant about something silly like vegetables or whatever, it's, that sort of ascetic and martial spirit, the sort of discipline and wrath, right? That really it leads to some very metal hardcore. So what was it exactly that from At the Gates to Integrity is a little sudden? Was it basically that like there was a good hardcore scene around you and you started going to shows, or was it just like more listening evolution?
I think it was mostly because there was a good hardcore scene around me. And I mean, at this time, especially around like 2008 and everything, that's when you had like a big like cross cut between hardcore and melodic death metal, because of course that's when when we were in the middle of this At the Gates core development,
Heaven Shall Burn. Right?
Yeah, for example. So this was like a transition from metal, because Heaven Shall Burn, of course, have been like big in the German metal scene, probably bigger in the German metal scene than the German hardcore scene, at least in the later points of the career.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that was one of the jumping points. Like this one and Maroon from Germany, which used to be very straight edge as well, like had a bit more hardcore heavy sound than Heaven Shall Burn, I believe, but still like very metallic. So yeah, the transition from the whole death metal stuff and the black metal stuff to there was actually kind of fluid, I think, like because I had people around me that were into this music, family members like my cousins and everything. They have been into that stuff and introduced me to it. Then I was obviously a young kid, so I haven't been to many extreme metal concerts back then, because most of the extreme metal concerts were like 18 plus in Germany, so you had no chance to go there actually. While hardcore shows were more welcoming for young people, and so I ended up attending my first hardcore shows at like 15, 16 years. And yeah, that was a good time. Like that's when I got to appreciate live music a lot. And that's basically how I got in there. It was more or less of a social phenomenon more than a musical one, because the people that I hung out with were mostly into hardcore, and that was like what was possible for me to attend. And yeah, that's how I got into Integrity in the next place, because I mean, Integrity are the most metal band that are still like clearly a hardcore punk band, in my opinion at least. Yeah. And the whole scene around them, like In Cold Blood, Ringworm, all this stuff is like very punkish still, but still has a clear metal edge to it and has like great metal solos to it and everything. So this like kind of made it easy to transition into hardcore, while still retaining the metal background, of course. Like I always liked metal and hardcore at the same time. So while there's a bit of like it's different than in the States, for example. Like metal and hardcore don't really work well together in Germany. Like there's a very I think like almost like antagonistic scenes. They don't really like each other. I always retained like a metal background in terms of music, while having developing a more hardcore mindset at the point. But yeah, it was always like equally important to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Antagonistic scenes, but the German hardcore German metalcore at that time was super metal influenced. So I guess it makes sense that if you're already listening to At the Gates and whatever, and then your buddies are going to hardcore shows, you hear hardcore bands that are playing At the Gates riffs and beatdowns and whatever, right? So in Fourth Crusade, that was sort of bolt thrower influenced in the manner that I guess, Heaven Shall Burn, a lot of our listeners will know, was very bolt thrower influenced and became more melodic. Was that, I haven't listened to any of that stuff, but was it also sort of, I assume, pretty breakdown oriented?
Yeah. Very heavy and like very mosh heavy, very like mid-tempo heavy. So yeah, it was a good live band. It was a fun stuff to play live because it was, of course, like have people dance, if you want to call it like that, and yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So how do you think that kind of so there are many people obviously eventually come back to. Well, first of all, I'm going to save that for. First of all, like what brought you back to writing more, focusing more of your creative energy on extreme metal stuff? At some point, right, you moved to Iceland. What brought you to Iceland?
So technically, what brought me to Iceland is my wife. So my wife is Icelandic.
Good reason.
Good reason, yeah. I have two half Icelandic children, so like that's why we're here in the first place. Like I came here as a tourist out of interest in like the culture over here and everything, and that's why I met my wife. And yeah, and we had to move over here in the end. Like I'm not regretting it. It's fine. But that was also basically the reason why I started writing black metal again, or like metal again, because I kind of lost that social feature to hardcore. And to be honest, I think hardcore loses much of its appeal once the social feature goes away. Because I feel hardcore is very like repetitive in that sense, like hardcore doesn't really give me much without, of course there are exceptions. There are exceptions like the Chromax or Integrity that I still listen to regularly, or Judge and stuff like this. Like this is cool stuff, but I think hardcore is much more interesting as live music. Has a completely different energy on the stage than it has on records. And when I moved here and lost that social component, also for other reasons that I don't want to discuss, it kind of lost its appeal. That's when I realized how much more I like metal than I do like hardcore, in terms of like actual music. And yeah, that was basically what brought me back to metal. Like it didn't bring me back to metal, but it put more emphasis on metal again for me, because like I have been kind of like going to more metal shows in my later years in Germany again, so it has been like gradually developing in that sense. But the isolation from the scene was basically what told me, okay, this is not what you want to do anymore. This black metal stuff is more of your thing, like that's how I got back into it.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that that's well put. The social aspect for hardcore is metalheads will often say like, how can you listen to this shit? It all sounds the same. And I mean, obviously, if people are listening to Terminus, they're pretty familiar with metal that all sounds the same, right? I mean, your Iljarns and your Gravelands and Morticians and whatever. But like, there's a common sort of. It's easy from a metalhead perspective to hear the lack of variation in hardcore songwriting and be like, how can you be into that? This shit is lazy. And it's like, or why are there so many hardcore bands that just sound like X or Y classic band, right? The worship band is almost the default kind of hardcore band.
I would cross it almost out. The worship band is the default in hardcore.
Oh yeah, here, say that again into the mic.
I think you can actually cross like the almost out, because I think the worship band is the default in hardcore. I mean, you have those waves in hardcore, I believe, like, like basically trance that come and go. So, for example, when Fourth Crusade started around that time, there was a huge wave of this early 2000s, late 90s metalcore, basically what we were playing at the time. But we managed to get into there right before it started. So I was like, I mean, it was really beneficial for us in that sense because like people had interest in the music and everything. But you can see those waves happening in hardcore over and over again. Then you have the youth crew revival that happens like every 5 years. So like every 5 years, everyone is traded for 3 years, and then like they drop again, which is reasonable. Like we all did. Yeah, you know, that's how hardcore works. I think hardcore is a funny dynamic of like going in waves and like bringing back the same thing over and over again. So I think give it 10 more years and you will have another youth crew revival going on or another 90s metalcore revival. This is just how hardcore works, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense because if it's so live oriented, it's like, okay, obviously there are not many D-beat bands that bring something distinctive to the table, but like, I want a D-beat band in my town that I can go see. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's because it's so focused on the live experience. It's like, okay, I don't need, I don't need a band that like innovates on the integrity formula. I want to be able to like go down to the local DIY venue, kill a 40 in the parking lot, and fuck shit up to a band that sounds exactly like integrity.
Exactly. I agree.
It's and so the sort of if the chaos and the chaos and energy of a small venue DIY show with 5 bands that each sound like different other bands is something that I think a lot of metalheads might. It's like a distinctive kind of thing that's extremely fun if you've done
exactly.
it.
And but I also think, like, not trying to get too political, but I think hardcore lost a bit of its danger recently because, like, I mean, in Germany, for example, I always have those discussions now about how hard are you allowed to mosh? Like, how hard are you allowed to mosh until it's considered sexist or like being like a macho, which just like, sorry, it takes the fun out of it. Like hardcore was fun because it was dangerous. Like you could expect to get a foot in your face and everything, but everyone was cool with that. Like everyone knew what was going to happen if you would go to the front. But this whole like wild thing, this dangerous thing about hardcore just disappeared, and this makes like, I think the danger is kind of what makes punk music punk. And without that, like, it lost all its spirit. That is another thing that made me leave the scene, because this has been gradually getting worse since like 2015. And yeah, not that interesting anymore.
Yeah, for sure. The scene police crackdown started around 2015 or 16. I think everyone can imagine. I think even in the metal scene, obviously, we all know what you're talking about. The thing about moshing is funny too, because like, the modern German culture, at least the mainstream culture propagated from the cities, is so buttoned up and gentle and domesticated. And yet the German hardcore scene, even the very lefty progressive wings of the German hardcore scene, were always so fucking brutal.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was like, I mean, hardcore in Germany was always having a clear like progressive stance. Even back in the days when they were going to beatdown shows and everything. I mean, of course, you had like those beatdown bands dropping like 2 or 3 words that people didn't want to hear. But, like the undertone was always very clearly left-leaning in that sense. But no one cared about people kicking other people in the face because this was just like how hardcore was. But no one connected any political ideals to it, or like any political stance of like sexism or machoism to it. This was just like how shows worked, and that was fine. That wasn't acceptable. That was an acceptable surrounding to be in, and that's just changed for a more like boring and more like buttoned up and very like middle class thing. That's not very punk at all.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So one thing I wanted to ask is like a lot of the American guys who get into black metal from hardcore are often originally, say, crusties or people who are into more sort of retro hardcore and whatever, like D-beat and raw punk and whatever is was the most common way back in the day, right? But you have this background in very rhythmic, breakdown-driven, low-end sort of beatdown stuff. How do you think that sort of experience inflects your black metal playing? Does it?
Probably not the beatdown end of it, but I think definitely the Chromax and Judge and Integrity end of it, because I think, for example, I mean, Ildiarn is as much of a hardcore band as a black metal band, depending on what material you take. For example, Forest Poetry is probably more the black metal leaning, but the demos, for example, they are very clearly hardcore punk influence. And I mean, the guy is vegan, the guy is straight edge, obviously had a hardcore punk band in the days. I don't remember the name, but I was Jeroen from Hart, he sent it to me. That was interesting stuff. But yeah, I mean, has always been a connection between hardcore punk and black metal in that sense. So, I mean, of course, there are certain like hardcoreisms to black metal that are just like in black metal by nature. But I think that stuff like the youth crew bands or the straight edge bands from the back in the days, or Chromax and Integrity, definitely had an influence on how I write Níðstöng, for example. And Níðstöng is a very like power chordish, both power chordish and not power chordish thing, because I think I kind of nailed this weird folkish feeling of Ildiarn, but I still have these clearly punkish, hardcore punkish riffs in it, and I think this is just something I have taken over from hardcore. Like,
yeah, well, one thing that strikes me about Níðstöng and even Perkwunos is you have a very crisp picking style, which means that the phrases, each note is inflected and carries a lot of weight. Níðstöng is like, you could play Ildiarn Worship in a way that's very unsyncopated, in a way that's very like and where with Níðstöng you have a real sort of syncopation and internal groove in a way that reminds me of hardcore, where like I can listen to you, I think that we talked about it when we reviewed it on the show, I can listen to you play like 8 of the same chord in a row and there's still some sort of motion in it.
Yeah, it might be just something that probably I took in subconsciously, because like I don't really, like I know what you mean, but I don't like do it intentionally, so it's probably just something that I probably took over from hardcore, in fact, because like, I mean, black metal is not really rhythmic in that sense, and yeah, rhythmic playing probably just came with hardcore and heavy metal. I think this is where I got that from.
Yeah, I think the rhythmic dimension of black metal is something that could really be fleshed out without losing the soul. And I mean, if you listen to any of the class, as you say, hardcoreisms are built into the genre, and if you listen to fucking De Mysteris or the Emperor EP or whatever, there's breakdowns on all of those, right? I mean, Night of the Graveless Souls has a 2-step.
And I mean, Faust from Emperor, he's a big hardcore guy. He's deeply into hardcore, and
yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Constantly posting pictures and Chrome extras and everything. So this is just like a thing that you had back then in the scene, you know. I mean, even if you listen to the proto black metal stuff like Sodom and everything, this is just fast hardcore music with a bit of like metal soloing, metal riffing in between. But I mean, early black metal and early thrash metal was basically just as much hardcore as it was heavy metal. And I mean, yeah, this just carried over to some of the black metal bands. I mean, obviously not all of them, but for example, Darkthrone, who didn't really start out that punkish in terms of sound, became gradually more punkish with the days, became more of like a D-beat, like punk band in the mid-phase. And yeah, I mean, this is just like, or Celtic Frost even. Celtic Frost is basically like GBH, just with like metal riffs to it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, lots of discharge in all of those bands, I think. Okay, yeah, so we've talked about this sort of black metal hardcore connection. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, if this isn't, too much sort of like scene gossip or whatever, like we were talking the other day about the Icelandic scene. Obviously, you're originally German, and the sound you're doing has a lot more in common with the international underground and maybe the American underground than the Icelandic black metal scene proper. But when you came here, that stuff was going strong. And you had some interesting ideas about that scene. I think we kind of were able to agree that, there was maybe with the way the scene sort of maybe crested too early, and there was the band's sort of musicianship and showmanship and professionalism kind of outstripped the emphasis on songwriting. But you said that there was some really good stuff in the early days of it, and I'd be curious to hear, like, you were talking about Svartidauði, and you had some interesting ideas about them.
I think Svartidauði are probably like talking about bands that came up past the 2000s. I would probably consider Svartidauði one of the top 5 bands, because it was a very its music is probably not really that accessible. Still not, although they had this big hype around the Icelandic there was a general Icelandic black metal hype going on, which is reasonable because it was at that time a very new thing. I mean, bands like Níðstöng and Sinmara and everything, they had a very distinctive sound at that time that was not really created in other countries, And but Svartidauði, they had this very hypnotic and druggy sound in a way, It was basically putting mayhem on shrooms and combining it with a bit of swans and everything, and had this very not really riffish sound. I mean, it had riffs, but still it was not riffy at the same time. It was very atmospheric and threatening, and it felt you felt bad, but in a cool way when you listened to it. And that's the same thing about the early Sinmara records. Before, I think it was called Aphotic Womb, before they went over to the more melodic approach, that I also really like. I was very admirable musicianship back there. And I mean, knowing Þórir, who played guitar for Svartidauði, still plays guitar for Sinmara and has a new project called Vavuloi, which is now coming out. That one is a unit. That's a phenomenal musician. And I think he kind of coined the sound together with bands like Caput Noctem and Níðstöng. And I think that was a good time for the scene over here.
So one thing we were talking about also with Svartidauði, and I think the Icelandic sound in general, is how death metal influenced it is. Right. And I think when we on the show, we were talking about on our last live stream the Icelandic scene, and when we sort of complain about Icelandic black metal, we're often being oh well, it has this DSO sort of skronk chord thing, and it's not really very riffy, et cetera, but if you listen to it as something that has this really important connection to death metal, it might sort of reveal a different side of itself. Svartidauði has these kinds of bolt thrower. Some of the most catchy parts are where they switch from blast to bolt thrower beats.
I always considered Svartidauði to be a part of this whole, where you would put Tatum Blood and everything, those very cavernous blackish death metal bands. Mm-hmm. I always perceived them more in this tradition rather than in the Deathspell Omega tradition, because it's had more this, it's not really this super hectic and complex thing that you find in DSO, for example, but it is of course very complex songwriting in a way, but has a more slowish or mid-tempo-ish approach to it, and is very hypnotic, and it sounds distant, it sounds like something that's surreal and weird, while Deathspell Omega doesn't really sound surreal in that sense. That just sounds not even weird, it just sounds kind of above, it's something that I can't really explain because it has such
overwhelming,
overwhelming, but also a very spiritual component to it, because it's so deeply religious in that sense. I mean, it's a very religious project in terms of lyrics and everything, and very philosophical. And while Svartidauði also has a philosophical feeling to it, it has more of a extraterrestrial, weird, voidish vibe to it, And I don't really see that, for example, in DSO. DSO has a very different approach. So that's why I didn't really understand all the connections that were made between Svartidauði and Deathspell Omega, because that's what you always heard on the internet, that the Icelandic black metal scene is basically ripping off Deathspell Omega, which I do not really agree to. For example, also Níðstöng, who was accused of the same thing, I would always put them more into the direction of Funeral Mist or Svartidauði even. or like a middle between the two. So I get where people come from, because of course it's dissonant. It has like, it's amelodic. It's unapproachable. Like has a very like dense sound to it. But I don't really see the similarities to Death from Omega in that sense.
Okay, that's fair. So it's we've got a robust defense of the Icelandic black metal scene from Adrian. I think I need to revisit some of this stuff now with this in mind, especially the sort of the death metal connection and all of that. Funeral Mist makes sense as a reference point for those bands. And they were also all back in the day, I think, connected to the Terator Possessions scene.
Yeah, very closely.
Which was sort of a more raw Black Circle version of Swedish Orthodox.
Yeah.
So I guess Funeral Mist.
I think like this whole there was kind of like a not a uniform sound, but there was bands from different countries that kind of were like you said, this Funeral Mistish sound. Like when you have bands like Hordemreif from Norway and everything, they were also connected to the scene that were not really similar in terms of style, but still conveyed a similar vibe. And I think that was something very special about Terator Possessions. I think the label had a very, like, not homogeneous roster, but there was still like bands that fit together. That was a great label, and I think there was this time around when those records came out and Fallen Empire was operating in the USA. Mm-hmm. That was a fucking great time for black metal. There was so much good stuff coming out at this time. And yeah, it was an interesting time to come back into black metal, because it was basically the same time where I started to like get deeper into black metal again. That was the stuff that was around back then, and it was a cool time to revisit the genre.
Yeah, sort of Icelandic black metal took off to such a huge degree that people it has sort of eclipsed the scene that birthed it, but really the Terator guys helped make Icelandic black metal. I mean, they brought it to everyone's attention. Fallen Empire was great at that time too. Terator and Fallen Empire, I would say, were these kind of like transitional labels that out of a pretty dark period for black metal helped build like the nowadays underground, right? I would say like Legion Blotan at the same time.
That was a great one.
Yeah, and Tortugard, right? And then you take those things and they all are, you go back to that sound and it's very different from how everything sounds now, but it was all like a path to the current thing.
Actually, kind of funny that you mentioned Legion Blotan, because it was one of the labels that got me into raw black metal back in the days. Like I told you the other day, I was sent loads of stuff by Dwight from Integrity, because there was this stuff when he was releasing, what was the band called? Sutakaksen, but it was like a
kind of noise thing.
Yeah, noise-ish black metal thing, and that was my first touching point with the very extreme ends of black metal. And I remember Dwight sending me white metal back in the days, which were signed on Legion Blotan back in the day. I think it's the guy behind the label, actually.
It's his band.
Yeah, like one of his many bands, I think. And that was an experience. I fucking liked that stuff a lot. Like, had a very majestic yet very raw and punkish sound to it. And that was one of the starting points together with like Mutilation and Vlad Tepes and everything. It was interesting stuff back then. Still is.
Yeah, I mean, from white metal, then it's a pretty direct path to Ildjarn.
Yeah. I mean, I think this was probably one of the first actual Ildjarn worship projects, like, or more or less of a worship project, because I think they had like a bit of a melodic undertone to it in some songs, at least.
Yeah, white metal it sounded like Ildjarn, but it sounded like Ildjarn, but it also sounded, I think, like there was a lot of old Burzum still in it, and a lot of RAC.
Yeah.
Very cool mix in that sense. And I mean, with the other band he sent me was Akitsa, which I still hold very dear. It's one of my favorite newer bands, I think. Like, I mean, if you want to consider them new, I think they have been around since the late 90s, so like they're not really new in that sense. But yeah, also very good stuff. Still a very big fan.
Yeah, those bands are interesting because there was almost like a moving backwards, like, or not like white metal and Äkth got popular with very eccentric, arty kind of like strange takes on a stompy skinhead black metal style that sort of all orbited around like absurd and Ildjarn. And now everything just sounds like absurd. Yeah. It's like some of the weird edges have been stripped away. And on the one hand, I guess people have like gone more to the source. But on the other hand, like a lot of the a lot of what made those bands original and pretty challenging to listen to has been lost.
Yeah, I think, for example, the latest Äkth record, I not remember the name, was probably something in French that I can pronounce. That was very RAC-ish. There's lots of like very classic like RAC or oil riffing in it, and like a bit like off-tune singing. That sounds like very amateurish old RAC records, which I mean in a very positive way. I like that stuff a lot. But yeah, it's true what you say. They kind of stripped the Ildjarn influence away from it, made it more, I wouldn't say accessible, but still, yeah, kind of accessible. But I think the production and stuff like might probably turn like new listeners off if you're not used to it. But yeah, in terms of music, probably more accessible than it used to be back in the days.
Yeah, but they really paved the way for all these much younger bands who are doing this more accessible version of the sound. Let's see. Well, it's been about an hour, and I think we've got to go to the pub. Let's see. To wrap it up, any last words for the people?
Not really sure. Yeah, probably just like keep an eye or two open, because I'm going to release the stuff in the near future. Like the stuff that I sent you earlier, the instrumentals, they are just like about to be wrapped up in the next 1-2 months maybe. It's of course like kind of unpredictable as that, because there's always something coming in between. But yeah, the plan is to release a new Perkwunos record now and new material with Níðstöng as well. Split record, soon to be announced. Yeah, that's basically it. Oh, also listen to Holyarrow. Have you checked these?
Not yet, not really. But
you should. That's my new big love. You know, that's what I have been jamming for the last 2 weeks, and this is fucking great. Like, give it a chance.